Great. Great. Thank you so much for joining us this morning for California Career Pathways Trust Reporting. Today our training outcomes are to understand the purpose and use of the California Career Pathways Trust Reporting Tool, understand the reporting features of the California Career Pathways Trust Reporting Tool, and gain knowledge of the data that needs to be collected, the submission processes for that data, and the related timeframes. Also, we are going to gain understanding of the resources to support data collection, uploads, and usage. The LaunchBoard California Career Pathways Trust Reporting Tool is intended to improve transparency between site-level faculty and staff across consortium institutions, also to foster conversations between members and partners regarding pathway programs and activities, to enable consortia to highlight effective efforts and identify areas for improvement, and also to inform California Career Pathways Trust grant reporting. Once populated with data provided by grantee institutions, users will be able to view outcomes for each of the institutions within the grant consortium by pathway and academic year. Also, view data summaries by institutional type, consortium, and consortium organization for each of the metrics identified. As you can see here in the screenshot, you will be able to drill down by cohort and data source, and view pathway characteristics for individual programs entered by grantees. Data descriptions are available through pop-up links on each metric and through the data element dictionary accessible right from the Career Pathways Trust app. Using a combination of locally and automatically calculated metrics, the LaunchBoard will provide totals for all of the metrics by year, institution, grant consortium, and pathway. Site-level faculty and staff can review the outcomes for their grant at any time. Data can be used for grantee conversations about student outcomes, including highlighting effective efforts and identifying areas for improvement. Getting started. In order to access the LaunchBoard, your organization must have an institutional membership with CalPass+. Membership is free and open to all community colleges and K-12 institutions. In order to join, direct the appropriate person or people at your institution to complete a memorandum of understanding located at the link below. All K-12 institutions must upload their CalPass files to CalPass+. In general, there are two types of user roles for the LaunchBoard. Consortia data managers. These are the people responsible for setting up the LaunchBoard reporting tool and for coordinating overall consortium data collection. Local data managers are the people responsible for coordinating and submitting locally gathered data metrics for their institution. General users individually are people who will be able to view and create reports but are not necessarily responsible for the data collection or submission. For each grant consortium is responsible for identifying an overall consortium data manager as well as local data managers for each of the participating K-12 and community colleges. Responsibilities for these individuals include LaunchBoard training. The consortium data manager and local managers will participate in training on how to collect and upload data. They will create a consortium record set. The consortium data manager creates information on which institutions are part of the grant consortium. They'll submit pathway program information. They will upload information about pathway programs for each institution, including the career technical education pathway code and program characteristics. They'll also submit pathway program participants. The local data managers will upload a file with information on the pathway program participants, plus fill out a survey that provides total participation numbers for some participant activities and milestones.
Megan, shall we
Yes.
have you take over at this point to talk to
Yes.
some
Yes.
specifics? Great.
Yes.
So again, this is Kathy Booth. I'm the LaunchBoard manager. What I want to do is I want to take you back a couple of slides to sort of clarify the way the data within this tool is going to be chunked. And this has to do with differences in how information is captured in various statewide data systems. So let's start with just what the tool looks like in general. What we have to do in order to present your data to you is we have to create several types of data that don't exist in any statewide data systems. So the first thing you're going to be able to do is identify which are the institutions that are in your consortium. So looking at the screen that's here right now, you can see that there's a button that's specific to creating a consortium. This is going to allow us to know which institutions are going to be seeing information about the work that you are doing. And in addition to this, there's some other types of data that we're going to have you track locally because they're not in existence in any statewide data systems. And I'm going to walk you through exactly how you're going to do that for each of these steps. One of the things I also want to make clear that you can see in here is that we have a list of all of the different types of information that CDE has asked you to report on for these grants. And what you'll be able to do is going in for your consortium, you'll be able to see the total number of students across the grants that meet each of these metrics. And you'll also be able to see information based on each participant in your consortium. So for example, you can see that we've got a metric here for the number of students who successfully completed all of their courses within the program with a grade of C or better. And you can see across this particular consortium, you've got more than 2,700 students who met this metric. And then you can also drill down and you can see the results for each of the districts that are participating in this particular consortium. This can be really helpful when you want to have conversations locally about differences in how each of you are helping to strengthen the pathways within your consortium. And then to help make that more apparent, you'll be able to mouse over each of those participating districts and find out a little bit more about those programs. What is it that this program is doing related to, for example, dual enrollment, block scheduling, inclusion of work-based learning? And this is going to make it a lot easier for you to look across the consortium and have really rich conversations about particular approaches and what seems to be effective. So because there's data that has to come from a number of different sources, that's why we've asked you to identify a number of different roles. And those are the three major roles that are identified here. So because we have to have you create a consortium, we need somebody who's going to have the authority to indicate which individual institutions are part of your grant. And then we're going to have to be collecting some local data, which means you have to have someone assigned to each district and college who can get that information up into the system, as well as this opportunity to have anybody that's associated with your grant. So not just the grant managers, but also teachers and faculty or counselors who can go in and see the information so that everybody has a better sense of how work is progressing within your grant consortium. So one of the things that we want to make really clear is that we want to provide as much support as possible to the folks who've been assigned these roles of helping get information up into the CCPT tab of the LaunchBoard. So that's why we've got a number of different ways that we're going to be giving you support. I think what's most important is that we're going to be having a training on May 1st where we'll walk anyone assigned these roles through the process that they'll use to gather local data, and we'll explain to them exactly how they need to format and capture the information that would then be going up into the CCPT tab. And we also have a number of resource documents, and I'll give you the direct links to those. And they've got screenshots and everything, so that everybody's going to have a lot of information to make this process work well. So what I'm going to be doing right now for the purpose of this demo is I'm going to walk you through something with a bunch of screenshots. But we want to make sure that you know that we do have a demo of the CCPT tab live right now. The one thing that's going to constrain your ability to see it is whether you have a login to CalPass Plus. So historically, CalPass has served the community college world, and the LaunchBoard in particular has been focused very much on community colleges. So this tab is one of our first opportunities to make it especially easy for K-12 practitioners to get in and see very similar information related to the work that K-12 and community colleges are doing together to support CTE pathways. So we do need you to create a login in order to see the information. because information is protected. You're only going to be seeing information associated with your institution, or in this case, the institutions that are part of your grant consortium that are being uploaded directly for the CCPT tab. So there's a URL here where you can go in and you can request a password. We will probably be able to get that back to you within about 48 hours, and the reason is that we have people looking at it and verifying that you are associated with the institution that you have requested to have access to. So we ask that you be sure to use your community college or district email address so it's easy for us to verify that we're looking at somebody from a particular educational institution. So if you were to go to the main LaunchBoard page, and we've got the URL right here that you could go to, so calpassplus.org and then /LaunchBoard, what you'll see is that there's a number of different tools that people have access to. And what you're going to be doing is looking for the one that's the CCPT reporting tool. And you can see right there is a link where you can get connected to the CCPT demo, so you can get in and work on this yourself after this webinar to get a better understanding of how the tool works. So again, one of the things that we have to have every consortium do is initial setup that will let us know which institutions are in the consortium. And this is because there's no public record of which K-12 districts and community colleges and other partners are part of each grant consortium. So that's why we have to have you create a data consortium manager who's going to be able to go into the LaunchBoard and be able to identify which institutions are part of your grant consortium. So the way you're going to do that is at the very top of the tool you'll see there's this nice green, there's a blue button that says Create Consortium, and it's a very simple form that that person can fill out. So probably this is going to be the person who manages your grant, and so it's just a dialog box. So what you'll do is you'll be able to name your consortium. So for example, we know that there are some consortia that have named themselves after highways, others after regions. You can go ahead and just go to that name, put in the name of the consortium, and then you can click all of the associating K-12 districts and college partners. I see that someone's saying that their screen won't let them go to the demo. Let's check into that afterwards. It may be that if you're trying to open this at the same time, it's better to just focus on the webinar for now, and I'll just make sure that there's no issues that are going to prevent you from getting to the demo. It may be that you need to get a login first. Okay, looks like there's a coming soon, so I'll attend to that as soon as we get done with the webinar to make sure that you'll be able to get in rapidly, maybe by the end of today. All right, so what you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and you're going to create that consortium by checking the boxes for the institutions that are part of that consortium. So let's talk about the data that are actually going to go into this tool. So one thing to be clear is that we're working from a list of metrics that CDE released last September. So we understand that there may be some work going on right now where CDE is going to provide further clarification of the definition of each of these metrics. And as soon as that definition is released, we'll go ahead and we will update the way things are defined within the tool on the LaunchBoard. But right now we're working off of the metrics that as they were defined last September. So some of these metrics are things that already exist in statewide data systems. So for K-12, that would be the CalPAD system. In other cases, they're for community colleges, they're coming from the Chancellor's Office MIS system. So any case where that data that CDE has asked you for, if it exists in a statewide system, it will automatically populate into this tool so you don't have to worry about collecting it. However, CDE has come up with a number of metrics that I think are very important for understanding the work that we do in CTE, particularly about work-based learning. And those are going to have to be gathered locally and submitted locally because they don't exist in any of our current statewide data systems. So a couple of things that you need to do in order to make sure that you get things automatically uploaded. This is particularly important for K-12 partners. The issue is that K-12 data does not go into CalPASS Plus automatically. For all community colleges, your data automatically comes over from the Chancellor's Office. But for K-12 institutions, it's voluntary participation. So this means that any K-12 district that's going to be trying to use the CCPT tool in the LaunchBoard is going to have to make sure that their district is uploading their CalPADS data into CalPASS Plus. Happily, this is a very simple process. You just fill out an MOU that indicates that it's okay to be putting the data up and certifying that CalPass Plus will ensure that it stays secure. And then what you're going to do is a simple drag and drop process where you bring your CalPads files into CalPass Plus. So this is not an onerous task. Once you do that, we can then populate metrics. So for example, we'll automatically be able to know which of your students graduated and put that information into the CCPT tab. However, because so many of the metrics, particularly for K-12, have to be locally gathered, you'll be needing to work this spring to put in place a data collection strategy that's going to allow you to capture this information. We've got a number of ideas about ways to do it, which are in the guide that we've put up, and I'll get you a link to that by the end of this webinar. But it is something that you're going to have to be thinking about this spring. So I see that someone put in the chat window about the comment about colleges information. Yes, the issue is that the Chancellor's Office for the California Community Colleges, which is the sponsor of CalPass Plus, automatically puts all of the data out of the community college system into the CalPass Plus system. So that means that any metric that can be automatically calculated out of that MIS system is automatically going to appear in the LaunchBoard, and there's nothing that the grantees need to do to make that happen. So that's automatic. It's only the K-12 data where you have to be sure that you upload your CalPads file for the automatic population to work. All right. So there are a number of different types of information that we need to collect from you locally in order for the tool to function. So the first of these is the pathway program characteristics. So this is not anything that's required by CDE, but as we talk to practitioners about what value a tool would have, one of the things they said is that it's really important to know what kind of pathway program each site has identified. And so we're going to have you fill out a simple survey that gives us information about that so that you can have the stronger data conversations. The second category of data that you're going to have to capture, this does pertain directly to CDE's required metrics. And there's two different types here. One is which students are actually participating in the pathway program, and the other has to do with metrics that can only be captured locally. And I see that we just lost the connection briefly. What I'm going to try to do is answer Diana's question, and if anybody, if people can hear me, if they can type in the chat window, that would be helpful so that I know that you can hear me. Great, thank you, Marty, for letting us know. So Diana, you said you had a question. So if we do not work with K-12, we don't need to enter data into CalPass Plus. I don't think there were any CCPT grant that went out that didn't include K-12 institutions. So I think that that would be really important to check for the way your Pathways Trust grant was created. You really should have every institution that was included in that proposal to CDE in the consortium. And that way you're going to be able to see all of the institutions. Otherwise the roll-ups won't work as well, because if everybody's putting in their data and you don't have all of your institutions there, the data that shows you the total number of students that, for example, participate in apprenticeship activities, if you don't have all the institutions in, then that rolled up number won't be accurate. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through the different types of data that you'll need to track locally in order to be responsive to the metrics required by CDE. So one of the things that we need to do, as I said, is we need to know more about those pathways, those pathway programs that you've created. So one of the very most fundamental things that we need is we need to know what the topic of that pathway program is. And unfortunately, there are different coding systems used in K-12 and community college that identify what the program of study is. Although this makes sense, because in general, programs are more general at K-12 institutions and more specific at community colleges. So the codes that we're going to ask you to use in K-12 is the CTE pathway code. And these are 58 broad pathways that have been identified by CDE. You'll be able to see a full list of those in the guide. And then for the community colleges, we're going to have institutions use the taxonomy of program or top codes that are associated with their pathway program. And sometimes they'll have programs where all of the courses are in the same top code, but sometimes programs are interdisciplinary. This is really common in ICT or digital media. So you'll have a chance to pick all of the related top codes that are associated with each of your pathway programs. So what's going to be really important is if you have, for example, a digital media consortium or a program across the consortium, you want to pick the same CTE pathway code for the digital media program across all of your K-12 partners, because that way all of your data is going to be grouped together. For community colleges, that top code may be more varied because there may be different pathways at different institutions. And then the other thing that you're going to be reporting related to your pathway are these various characteristics. So again, these are not mandatory for CTE, but they're a great way to have a conversation about what it is that each pathway program includes, because we know that it's not the same from site to site. There are some sites that may have been linked learning partners for a long time who may have very complex programs with combinations of both CTE and math and English courses and embedded work-based learning. And there may be other programs that are just starting out where it's basically a series of linked courses. So this is a way for you to be able to identify what those characteristics are. The way you're going to get this information into the LaunchBoard is very straightforward. So you're going to be clicking again on a button at the top of the tool that says Create a Pathway Program, and then it's a very simple form that you're going to fill out to put this information in. So at the top here, you're going to select the district that this grant is associated with. You'll pick the starting year for the cohort, because we realize that pathways may change. So if you're working with seniors now who started last year, you'd be entering 2013-14 as the starting year for that cohort. You're going to select that CTE pathway code, the one of 58, and you see we've got them listed by the name. You don't have to know the code by heart. And then there's just going to be a very simple checkbox where you can indicate which of the following characteristics are associated with that program. So I see there's some questions. What if we have academies that are implementing more than one CTE pathway? Do we use one code or all codes? That's a great question, Sarah. What you're going to do is you're going to create a different pathway program for each of those. So if you have one in digital media and one in healthcare, you'll create different pathway codes for each, and that way within your grant consortium you'd be able to go in and just pick which of the programs you want to look at when you're looking at your data all in one place. Marty asked, will this be a drop-down list or can items be added? What we're going to do is we're going to have a list, as you can see up on the screen right now, with checkboxes. We're having it be standardized across the state because this allows us to make the tool function, but we are working with practitioners right now to finalize what's in this list, because what we want it to do is to be useful for you. But remember, the way you're going to end up seeing this information is you're going to mouse over that little blue eye button in the tool itself, and then you're going to see a list of characteristics. So we're not trying to be completely exhaustive because that would be really hard to read, but it will give you an ability to get a sense about whether a pathway program in one district versus another has various characteristics that will be important for the conversations you might want to have about ways that you're going on and doing ongoing development for your pathway programs. All right. So now we've talked about how we're sort of setting up those pathways within the grant consortium, of which you're likely to have many. The next thing we have to do is have you enter information, and this again is the portion that is required by CDE. And we really have to have two different types of uploads that you're going to be doing. One has to do with the student participants themselves, who are the individual students that are part of this pathway program. And then the second grouping of metrics that you'll be uploading are basically different types of activities that have been identified by CDE. And so these fall into categories of there's 6 different types of work-based learning and student leadership. There are some measures that we just have to be done locally, like whether students got a C grade or better in every course in the pathway program, as well as whether students attained their LCAP academic performance indicators, state and national certification, dual enrollment and credit by exam, and participation in post-college training. These things are going to be listed. Well, I'll walk you through it. It's just a very simple form where you're going to put in aggregate numbers. That's going to be very different for student participants, where we actually need you to give us really detailed information about each of those students. So the reason we set it up this way is because pathway programs vary so much from site to site. So there are, some sites that have just a couple of linked courses. There's others where there's many other characteristics of the students that are participating in that pathway program that's not going to be trackable in something like the CalPADS data system. So since it is so variable from site to site, we decided the best way to have this function would be for each site to tell us who it is that is in your cohort. And once we have this information, so we've got the ID, the student's name, date of birth, gender, the academic year, the high school code, and the pathway code, what that allows us to do is to track that student over the next 6 years. So we can see whether they show up in community college and whether they're attaining all the milestones that have been established. So this is one where you will have to be working with sensitive data and be getting that information up really at the individual student level. The other ones are going to be aggregate numbers because there's a lot of different ways people are going to be collecting that information, and I will walk you through it. So I'm going to go back to some of the questions. Sabrina's asking, will there be standardized definitions like dual enrollment and capstones? So what we're going to be doing is we're going to try to work off of the definitions that CDE puts out, and we'll make that as clear as possible in the form that you fill out because we know that these aren't always defined the same way, but we're waiting on CDE to get clarity about how they want those items defined. Nick asks, why is this limited to high school? Some students start the pathway in middle school. This is certainly true, but most of the metrics that CDE has identified are high school specific metrics. And so we didn't have as much information going back to middle school that we saw on those metrics. But you could start your cohort at any year. So if you are starting with students in 7th grade, you can then sort of say, okay, we're starting this year, assign the year that they started the cohort, and then we can track them from there. Sarah asked, what about articulated courses? The metrics put out by CDE didn't include articulated courses, which is why they're not listed specifically in the tool. All right, so let's start talking a little bit more about these two different types of data that you need to upload. So the first of these is the student cohort. So this is the place where you have to have very specific information about each student. So the way you're going to get that into the system is you're going to click the Upload Student Cohort button that's right at the top of the tool, and that's going to give you a dialog box with a link of a template. So you'll be able to download that to your computer, and you'll be able to then put in all of the student records for whoever's in your cohort. Then you're going to save that as a TXT format, and then you'll be able to upload it through the simple drag and drop process directly from that dialog box, and it will go up into the LaunchBoard tool. I see we do have a question from Michelle. Which definitions are included in the data element dictionary? So what we did is we were working off the definitions as they were given last September by CDE. So we have, wherever possible, put in clarity, but again, we're waiting on CDE to give us more specifics. And at the point that we have it, we will update the data element dictionary. So just to be clear, the data element dictionary was not created by CDE. It was created by the LaunchBoard team looking at the metrics that were put out by CDE last fall. So we, again, will align that with whatever guidance comes from CDE. All right, so let's talk next about the locally gathered metrics that are activities. So here you're going to be clicking a different button, again at the top, Enter Activity Metrics. And then what you're going to get is a dialog box that once again is going to be like a survey. So you'll be selecting which is the sort of cohort that you're uploading data for. So in this case you can see this was the Foothills Consortia. This is made up. Assuming that we're entering data from Sierra College for a farming pathway in the year 2012-2013. You then see a list of all of the different metrics that have to be gathered locally, like here we've got the dual enrollment and credit by exam, and you're just going to put in a number, like a total of 32 students received credit by exam. And that's the way you're going to get this kind of information into the LaunchBoard. Excuse me. So let's talk a little bit about timelines. The first reports are due in August, and so that means that we do have a fairly tight timeline between now and then to get information into this new tool. So what we're requesting is that by April 30, you should have all of your local data managers identified. So you want to go back to all your districts, figure out who the right person is, go to all your community college partners, and decide who it is that's going to load that information about the definition of what that pathway program looks like at the local level, and who's going to be uploading your cohort, and who's going to be uploading the attainment of all of those other activity metrics. Then we'll have a training on May 1st where all those folks will be walked through this in great detail, introduced to the guide and other resources that we have to support them. And then what we recommend is that by June, you really need to have those pathway program characteristics uploaded by the local data managers. By July, you need to get that CalPADS data file uploaded into the LaunchBoard through CalPADS Plus. That's a drag and drop process, so you need to make sure that that's happening in July. And you're going to make sure that you have all your information about both the specific students that participated in your program this past academic year, as well as the numbers for all of those locally gathered activity metrics. Then it's all going to automatically populate, and in August you can use that information for your reports. So there are a number of different resources we want to make sure to point you to help support this process. So I've given you direct links here to things like the CTE pathway codes, so you can see what those 58 codes are, as well as a list of all of the different top codes for community colleges if you're not familiar with them. We have a direct link to the data element dictionary, so you can see how we have tried to define all of these terms for the purpose of this initial data collection. You'll be able to access the demo, and if there's any difficulties, we will work on that and make sure it's fully functional by the end of the day, so you can play around with this and see what it's like to work with the tool. And most importantly, we have a resource guide, and there's a direct link here. What you'll be able to do from this resource guide is it has screenshots for everything that's been in this the demo that we've been doing this webinar today, as well as additional resources. So for example, I know that probably one of the questions that you've got has to do with, well, how would we track things like students' participation in those different work-based learning activities at the K-12 level, or how would we gather information about dual enrollment and credit by exam at the community college level? So what we've done is we've been partnering with Kazan, who has come up with an idea for ways to track, in particular, the K-12 metrics by creating shadow courses in local data systems. So this is something that would work no matter whether you're using Aries or PowerSchool or any of the other commonly used software for tracking student level data at K-12. So built into that resource guide is an idea for how you could create the shadow course that would allow you to track information on all the students that are participating in each pathway program on the K-12 level. Similarly, for community colleges, there's this two metrics, one about dual enrollment, one about credit by exam. Well, the Chancellor's Office has just purchased a system called CATMA, which allows you to track dual enrollment articulated courses and credit by exam. So every community college in the system is going to have free access to this tool. And what we can then do is have you work with K-12 sites and community colleges to use CATMA as a way to track those activities that are happening sort of between K-12 and community colleges. It does require a certain degree of work because you have to sort of create the courses in the system and then certify whether students completed those courses, whether they received credit by exam, but it gives you a mechanism in which to track this critical activity that's part of a lot of our CTE pathway programs. Similarly, there is a number of metrics in that CDE asked for, like attainment of third-party credentials, and there is a survey that I think more than 40 community colleges participate in called the CTE Outcome Survey that does gather information on the number of students getting third-party credentials. So if your college partner uses something like that, that might be a way for you to get information. So we've tried to give you as many tools as possible in that resource guide to support the data collection that you will need to do locally. All right, so I'm assuming that there will be lots of questions. Rochelle asked if this webinar is being recorded to access later. It absolutely is. Going back to this link here at the bottom, the Doing What Matters link, that's where we have already posted the PowerPoint that we're presenting today and the resource guide. So to be clear, the LaunchBoard is a tool that's been built in CalPAS Plus by the Chancellor's Office. And the intention is to use it to support CPE reporting. And what the Chancellor's Office realized was that there were so many of the community college grantees that were also part of the CCPT grant consortia and were being asked to track things that are very similar to what CCPT is asking for, and what the Doing What Matters framework for the community colleges is asking for is very similar. And so it was the Chancellor's Office that decided to move forward with building out this tab as a way to support all of you out in the field that are doing this important work to try to make it so that you all can have a place where you can look at your data together as best as we can possibly create it. So that's why you're going to go to the Chancellor's Office website in order to see all of these resources that are designed to support the CCPT grant. And you can go back here over time, and we're going to keep putting resources up. So this is a place that you can go as a central location to get information about using the CCP tab in the LaunchBoard. Nick asked, are we still using the statepathways.org articulation agreements? I think that's a local decision. The issue that we found with trying to use those articulation agreements to do data tracking is that sort of tells us whether institutions have agreements. It doesn't necessarily tell us which students are participating in those courses that the articulation agreements govern. And because some of those agreements were very short term, it was very difficult to translate that into another option. So it was actually the Academic Senate that first brokered the connection between LaunchBoard and CATMA as a way to try to gather that information, because it was a tool that I think about 20 different institutions were already using across the state. Michelle asks, will we receive information about the May 1 training? Yes, that is posted again on the Doing What Matters site, and there you'll be able to see information about the login just like you were able to see today for today's session. Also up on that website is a couple of documents that will be really helpful as you're going out to recruit those folks that are going to do the data uploads, either for the whole consortium or by site. We have one-pagers that explain exactly what it is that person is going to need to do. And then there's just a very simple worksheet that you can fill out to identify who all those people are. And then you can email that information into CalPAS Plus. And the email address is embedded in that document. And that way it'll be easy for you to get that information to us so that we can be in communication directly with those data folks, in addition to the communications that we send out through listservs and other sources. The link doesn't work for the taxonomy of program codes. I will double check that. I'm not quite sure why it's not working, but I will make sure that we post an updated link if this one is not working. If there are additional questions, I encourage you to use that chat box over on the left-hand side of your screen, and we can answer any of those questions for you. Diana asked, local data managers, is this support already established within our district, or does this person need to be identified? If so, is our DSN responsible fiscally? The local data managers, this is something that you would need to assign. So every grant consortium was encouraged to think about how they were going to do their data collection by CDE originally. I think every consortium has approached this challenge differently, but our guess is that you're going to have to tell us who it is that holds this role, because we don't know at this point who's been identified locally to do the data collection. If it's the DSN, I think it really depends whether that, and for those of you who aren't familiar with this acronym, a DSN is a Deputy Sector Navigator, which is a funded role through the community college system that supports work regionally and within a sector. If the DSN is part of the CCPT grant, then presumably they'd be doing this as part of their responsibilities in that role. I'm not totally clear how often Deputy Sector Navigators were pulled into Pathways Trust grants. But again, as a reminder, this tool is specific to the Pathways Trust consortia as opposed to any of the grants given out by the Chancellor's Office. This is a CDE grant opportunity. So again, if you've got questions, go ahead and put them in the text box on the left. Oh, and Sabrina, thank you very much for putting up a different link that may be able to get you directly to those top codes. You can also, I mean, ideally the person who'd be entering this information from you from the community college level might be your local institutional researcher, or your IT person would know what top codes are associated with particular programs of study. But this is a great place to have a clear conversation between that data manager and the person who is working on the Pathways Trust grant for community colleges, so that they will be able to be clear which are actually part of the Pathway program that is being funded by the grant. And again, you can type your questions into that chat window over on the left. All right, so we will stay on the line for another minute or two to see. Oh, Sabrina asked, is there anyone we can contact with specific questions? Absolutely. So I'm going to type this into the chat window so that you can see it. All right, so we have a support email for the LaunchBoard in general. So it's launchboard@cccco.edu. So those are 4 C's, and that stands for the California Community College Chancellor's Office. So you can direct any question that you've got to that email address, and that goes to me, and I will get it to the person who can best answer your question if I can't answer it myself. All right, so again, I will stay on the line for another couple of minutes in case there's other questions that occur to you. And if not, thank you so much for attending this webinar, and we look forward to giving you any support that we can to help with your work on this project.